Morning, everybody. Hope you've been staying safe and well. As promised today, we're going to have a look at the third question on language paper one, which is the structure question. Now, we could argue that this is the most complicated question on the language paper, certainly in the reading section. It's something that's slightly unusual, it's slightly different, it's not quite what we're expecting, what we've been coached to do in terms of analysis, looking at the effect of language, looking at words, phrases, techniques, that sort of thing. This is much more about the building blocks of an entire piece of writing. It is a little bit more complicated, so it's worth just refreshing our memories about some little techniques that we can use to help to analyse this question and help to break it down into its component parts. So I'm going to present the slides for you for now, just to talk you through some ideas, and then we'll have a go at modelling a response to the question three structure question. We're going to be using the same paper that I looked at in the previous video, which is the Jamaica In paper. And like I say, you can access that through the AQA website, or you can go back to the video previously and have a listen to it. I'm not going to read through the full extract again. So here we go. So the question three structure question looks a bit like this. So you've now got to think about the whole of the source. Now that's significant. You are talking about the whole source. We're not talking about an extract here. The expectation is you're going to refer to a range of evidence across that text. It's not going to necessarily be from one paragraph. It should be from beginning, middle, and end. They give you a little bit of context that we know this is from the opening of a novel. And then how is the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? You could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, why the writer changes as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. Now, what I would suggest is, rather than saying you could write about, it's what you should be writing about. And you should be writing about the beginning and then why that changes as the source develops. Okay? Now, traditionally, with a narrative structure, if you're talking about whole novels or whole plays, there are very specific points within a text that you could refer to. And this is a model of a traditional narrative structure where you would have an introduction where everything seems fine and everything is in a state of equilibrium or balance. If you're looking at those of you that do media, Todorov's narrative theory, then rising action as something dramatic happens and there's a problem that the characters face, which is a disruption, in Todorov's words. It reaches its worst point, which is a climax, and then there is falling action towards a new resolution. If we think of something like An Inspector Calls, we have an introduction at the dinner party. The rising action is the inspector's arrival and his interrogation of the characters. The climax being the ultimate revelation about Eric's child. The falling action after the inspector leaves, and then the new resolution with the final phone call at the end. Now, this can happen many times across a narrative. It might be that this occurs a few times throughout. When we're referring to whole texts, structure becomes easy. However, in this paper, because you're only referring to a small extract, it can be slightly more complicated. But using terms like rising action, climax, falling action, resolution can be useful and can help to illuminate your response to this question. A strategy that I've used with classes in the past that seems to work quite well is something that you might have seen in Key Stage 3. This is something I use lower down in the school to teach when we should be paragraphing, when we should be making changes in paragraphs, and when we should be splitting our ideas up. So you were taught that anytime you change time, place, topic, or person is when you should be changing paragraph. And it's the acronym TIP-TOP. Now, when you get to question three, it might be worth just writing down TIP-TOP, just to remind you, these are things that can change. And if they do change, then that is a structural choice that the writer is making. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about all four of these with some questions that you should ask yourself, and then I'm going to have a go at doing one of these paragraphs modelled, obviously leaving the other three open for you to have a go at if you'd like to. Okay, just to show you how you go about approaching this, because you're not being asked to analyse language here. What you're being asked to analyse is structure. You've been asked to analyse how this thing has been put together. You don't need to worry about the language devices or the effect of the key words. What you're looking at is structure, how this is being put together. So the first thing you might want to ask yourself is the TI from the tip top is time. So are there any flashbacks or are there any flash forwards in the text? Does it stay as a linear narrative or does it move and jump backwards and forwards? Which is an interesting question because some texts that you get possibly will do that. There might be a flashback or there might be a flash forward. Is the text written in the past, present, or future tense? So, for example, it might be a character recalling something in their past. It might be something that's happened currently, or it might be a prediction about what's going to happen in the future. Does this text start and end at the same point in time? It could be that it goes through a fluctuation where it goes forwards and then backwards. Okay, so time is an interesting one to consider. It might be that things are happening linearly, as in they're happening in a straight line. It might be that the text fluctuates in time. The second one to consider is the P from tip top, which is place. Now, this is one that most texts will do. Okay, so does the extract start by establishing a particular setting? So does it start by setting the scene or setting a place where this is location where this is taking place? Does the text rapidly shift in locations? Does it move across different places? Does it go from one place to another very, very quickly? Does the text stop and focus on specific places? Does it focus on a particular area that it wants to talk about? And does the text start and end at the same location? Those are interesting questions that we can ask ourselves about place and about how that shifts across a text, and certainly across an extract. Another one that you probably will see changing across a text is the TO from tip top, which is topic. Now, what we can say with this is basically focus. You can change that word topic to focus if you like. So does the text shift focus across the extract? Does the text have a wide focus or a narrow focus at times? Does it talk about big expansive locations, or does it zoom in and focus on very narrow specific things? Let's say there the words zoom in and zoom out are particularly important. Does it focus on one small aspect and then zoom back out again? Does it have big topics that it's talking about, or smaller topics? Does the text start and end discussing the same topic? Has there been a change that's occurred across this? Does it start and end in the same idea and being like a cycle, being a cyclical structure? Okay. And then finally, probably the one that I'm going to look at today is the final P, which is person. So is there a narrator? Is the narrator an omniscient character? So is there a third person narration? Is it first person narration? Are there new characters introduced, and how and why are they introduced? Does the text focus on the descriptions or feelings of a character? Does the text start and end with the same character, or is it a change in the character that is being discussed? So ultimately, what we have are a lot of questions we can ask ourselves. And as you read the extract, you should be thinking, are there changes in time? Are there changes in place? Are there changes in topic? And are there changes in person? And if they are, perfect. That's exactly the sort of thing you are looking for question 3. Now, if we look at the mark scheme, what we have here is the top mark scheme is a perceptive detailed analysis for the full 7 to 8 marks. So you're looking for about 2 paragraphs, and the structure of it, we'll talk about structure again, the structure of the paragraph is slightly different. When we look at this, the evidence is embedded, but it's not analysed. It is used to support your points that you're making on structure, but you don't need to get into depth of it. But there is lots of evidence that comes from across the text. It's not just from one paragraph, it's from a range of different areas. And you'll see this when we model it together, but this is a good example of what the exam board are looking for. So this is a response looking at the idea of changing place and about taking the reader on a journey. The text is about a journey is structured to also take a reader on that journey, from the general to the specific, from the outside to the inside, from the weather through the coach, the driver, the horses, to the passengers. There is also a constant reminder of the weather which permeates each part, the little drips of rain that come through the roof, and later the rain oozed through the crack in the roof onto Mary's shoulder. So the reader is constantly made wet and uncomfortable, just like the passengers. Around the middle of the extract, the outside and the inside are made to coincide with the old man opening the window. This also moves the focus of the reader to the inside of the coach. The text narrows down to take the reader from the countryside of Cornwall with its wide granite sky and the evening which closed upon the hills to the inside of Mary Yellen's head as she contemplates the weather and hopes for a momentary trace of blue heaven. Okay, so I'm just going to stop presenting this for a second, and then we're going to have a look at the extract itself. Okay, so if we have a look at the extract here, the topic that I'm going to look at is the idea of characters. So I'm going to look at the idea of people, the people that are introduced in the extract, and how they are presented to us as readers. So if I'm reading through, the first part of the extract is all about the weather. The first introduction of a character occurs here, with the driver muffled in his greatcoat to his ears, bent almost double in his seat. Okay. As the extract develops, they introduce the passengers, including an old fellow who rose from his seat in a fury, fumbling with the window sash and let the window down with a crash. We have a jovial woman in a blue cloak sighing heavily in sympathy and then getting on with her basket and eating the cake. And then finally, we have the introduction of Mary Yellen, who is the only named character within this extract. Now, that could be considered significant because this is probably our most important character. So if we are looking at introducing a paragraph for this, okay, we're going to start by thinking what changes. So ultimately, we go from introducing a range of characters, the driver, the passengers, and finally focusing on Mary Yellen. So this is the point that we're going to be making. Across the extract, we are introduced to a range. Firstly, the driver battling the weather, then the other passengers, and finally the lead character. Mary. So this is our point. Across the extract, we are introduced to a range of characters. Firstly, the driver battling the weather, then the other passengers in the coach, and finally the lead character of Mary Yellen. Now, we need to get some evidence in here. So I'm going to start by the beginning, look at the driver, then I'm going to move on to the other passengers, and finally I'm going to look at Mary Yellen. So I'm going to do the driver's bit in blue. If we go back, we need to find some evidence for the driver. So I'm going to use the driver muffled in a greatcoat to his ears. Okay. So here we go. The beginning of the extract. The writer so this is my evidence. At the beginning of the extract, the writer chooses to focus on the driver muffled in his greatcoat to his ears, allowing the reader to imagine him battling the weather. Then to change it, we need to look at a second bit of extract from the middle where it's the other passengers. So if I'm looking here, we could potentially look at a jovial red-faced woman in a blue cloak sighing heavily in sympathy. Okay, so this one I'm going to focus on in my next bit. The reader is introduced. Okay, so as the extract develops, the reader is introduced to other passengers, including a jovial red-faced woman who sighed in sympathy. Here, this So what we've got so far is a point, something from the beginning, something from the middle, and now we need something from the end about Mary Yellen. If I read this to you at the moment to see where we're at. Across the extract, we're introduced to a range of characters. Firstly, the driver battling the weather, then the other passengers in the coach, and finally the lead character, Mary Yellen. At the beginning of the extract, the writer chooses to focus on the driver, muffled in his greatcoat to his ears, allowing the reader to imagine him battling against the elements and the weather. As the extract develops, the reader is introduced to other passengers, including a jovial, red-faced woman who sighed in sympathy. Here, this creates the impression of discomfort and how the weather is affecting everyone inside the coach as well. Finally, sorry, my colour blindness is kicking in. Can't tell if I've changed colour or not. We'll go blue. Definitely tell the difference there. Finally, we are introduced the only named character. Now we need to find some evidence for Mary Yellen. So we look at the final paragraph. Her chin cupped in her hands, her eyes fixed on the window. Look at this, there is a slight difference in the way that Mary Yellen is behaving in contrast to the other passengers. So the driver is muffled in his greatcoat and worried about the weather. The red-faced woman sighs in sympathy about the weather and the rain and the old man who slams the window shut. Mary Yellen is fixed on the window and her chin is cupped in her hands, which shows she's a bit more thoughtful. So this could be a structural choice, that our main character is a bit more thoughtful and less affected by the weather. So finally, we were introduced to the only named character, Mary Yellen, with her chin cupped in her hands, her eyes fixed on the window. This indicates she is lost in thought and helps to create the pressure that she is heading into the unknown. To wrap it up, we need to just make sure we're referring to structure and just making sure that we are doing exactly what the question is asking us to do. So we've been asked to comment on structure. We've talked about something from the beginning, we've talked about something from the middle, and talked about something from the end. Now, why is the writer doing this? The writer introduces a range of characters to explore the chaos and discomfort in journey. Finally, introducing our main character as someone more thoughtful. If I read the full paragraph back to you, we've got this. Across the extract, we are introduced to a range of characters. Firstly, the driver battling the weather, then the other passengers in the coach, and finally the lead character of Mary Yellen. At the beginning of the extract, the writer chooses to focus on the driver, muffled in his greatcoat to his ears, allowing the reader to imagine him battling against the elements and the weather. As the extract develops, the reader is introduced to other passengers, including a jovial, red-faced woman who sighed in sympathy. Here, this creates the impression of discomfort and how the weather is affecting everyone inside the coach as well. Finally, we are introduced to the only named character, Mary Yellen, with her chin cupped in her hands, her eyes fixed on the window. This indicates she's lost in thought and helps to create the impression that she's heading into the unknown. The writer introduces a range of characters to explore the chaos and discomfort in the journey, finally introducing our main character, someone more thoughtful, and then creating an anticipation for her arrival. Now, crucially, what we've got is we've got three pieces of evidence. We've got one from the beginning, or the driver's paragraph. We have one from the jovial red-faced woman, or two from the jovial red-faced woman, sorry, and then we've got one from Mary Yellen. What I haven't done is talked about like the keyword implies. What I've done is I've talked about beginning, middle, end, and then an overall about how that's been structured and why that's been structured in that particular manner. Now, if we had two paragraphs to that quality, that is a good chance of getting 7, 8 marks on this question, because we're talking exactly what the exam board are looking for, what structural changes are taking place and why. That's the crucial aspect. It's why that is happening. Okay. So I'm going to stop presenting that for a second. Obviously, this is available up on Google Classroom as well. Hopefully, that's been a really useful rundown for question 3 and having a look at that structural aspect. It is a tricky question. The key things to remember are looking at beginning, middle, and end, and the idea that you do not need to analyse the language. It's more about the analysing the construction, why you think this is happening, what's the significance of putting it in this particular order. Next lesson, I'm going to have a look at question 4, which is essentially a combination question, looking at analysing language, but also getting across your point of view and a perspective, arguing with a statement. Question 4 is much more like what we're used to doing with analysing evidence and the way that those paragraphs are structured. So I find question 4 a little bit easier than question 3 sometimes. This is tricky, but if you can get your head around what the exam board are asking you to do, it becomes much more simple. So like I said, we'll have a look at question 4 next time. Until then, take care and stay safe.